All right. So I'm Richard Nikoley. I have a blog called freetheanimal.com, and occasionally I interview interesting people. And I have with me here today Curt Doolittle, Mr. Curt Doolittle. And he is on the East Coast right now. We're doing a Skype chat about some things. And he is the founder of a I guess a philosophy. It's many things, I think. And it's called propertarianism. It has elements of libertarianism, and it also has some other elements. But I'm not gonna put words in Curt's mouth. He also maintains a very prolific Facebook presence, and of course when I post this I will put in all the appropriate links, and so that you can follow whatever you want. And so today I'm going to talk with Curt about an element that I have a particular interest in propertarianism, and that's the whole thing around truth and honesty and testimonialism, and we'll map out all of those things. And Curt, I've watched a lot of your videos, and sometimes you're kind of speaking to your own highly intelligent audience of propertarians, and other times you're more kind of gearing it towards libertarians.
The guys.
What's that?
We can talk up here, or we can go down to the locker room. I mean, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there.
Some concepts are better communicated at the locker room level, and some of them just unfortunately have to be up there in the analytical speech of analytic philosophy. Unfortunately.
Yes. And so my audience is mostly libertarians. There's Ayn Rand fans, anarcho-capitalists, kind of the gamut. Right, so
that's where I came from. I mean,
right, and so along those lines, I wanted to start off by talking a bit about Ayn Rand, because almost all libertarians of whatever stripe have some. She was part of their formation somewhere along the line. Typically,
I mean, I went through the Randian thing too. I mean, I understand it. I was an advocate of her work when I first got started.
When was this?
I don't know, maybe back in the 90s.
Yeah, me too. Early 90s. Yeah.
I mean, the way I put it to people is, because she writes in an accessible form using the novel, and she introduces enough philosophy, it's a great doorway into libertarianism. Mm-hmm. I think the only problem with her work is really the kind of people who get stuck in it instead of seeing it as a doorway. I mean, it's a door, and if you stick in the doorway, you've only made it, to step one. Uh-huh. And so, I'm usually a defender of her against people who are criticizing the kind of people that get stuck in the door instead of her work.
Right.
And so, I mean, as I, did my own, develop my own work, I was trying to solve a fairly serious problem in libertarianism. And, I still have an affection for these people. I don't have the disaffection for her that I have for Rothbard, but even Rothbard, I can forgive after a while. Right. I mean, it takes me a while, but I'll forgive him eventually.
I think I'm a bit outlier in the sense that my introduction was exclusively through her nonfiction, and I'd read most of it before I ever read the novels, and it was so I was coming at it in that different way. When I encounter later on with the advent of the internet, and I encounter the Usenet and groups with these Randroids that we used the term back then, and it's funny that the real diehard sycophants, the getting stuck in the door kind of people, and those of them who say, they even go so far sometimes as to use the phrase, what would Rand do? Like, what would Jesus do kind of
Well,
thing?
I mean, but this is one of the arguments I make all the time is that, there's a class system to society. Even Christianity, I mean, you can tell the IQ of a member by asking the denomination. I mean, we have this across the spectrum. We have this in philosophy. There are some people who read literary philosophy, some people who read analytical philosophy. There's some of us who do pure science.
Right.
Some of us go beyond. I mean, my actual work is you'd categorize it as logic. And so, I mean, when you look at this, it's wrong to say there's a right way, like there's a universal Christianity or universal Marxism. You want to look at these frameworks as what is the common thread, regardless of the grammar it's communicated with, right? And for me, if you say what would Rand do, and if you're a middle class guy, it's actually a pretty good question.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's not a bad question. Because you can be that middle class guy can be easily trapped by the limits of Christianity and the self-destruction of Christianity, and just as the Christian can be overly limited by some of the fundamentalist things.
Yes.
So these are all rational choices we make, and one of my principal arguments is against the concept of monopoly. Right? We have virtue ethics, we have rule ethics, and we have outcome ethics, because each of those ethics are dependent on how much knowledge you have. Well, we have religion, which is a graceful failure. Everybody will forgive you if, in the end, in the face of some difficult question, you chose the religious lesson, because in the end, that's the most forgiving means of decision making. On the other hand, we don't very often, I mean, economics is I'll close this really quickly, but economics is the greatest example of, economics is a highly specialized knowledge where knowledge of one discipline, in other words, one segment, does not transfer to the other, another. And so you have, when they say all economists say something, well, that means absolutely nothing, because there's only 4 economists who understand anything about any given niche. All the rest of them are doing what we all do, which is overestimate our ability to predict a niche bit of information without having the requisite expertise and knowledge.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So no more monopolies.
Yes. So, okay, so one more thing on Rand, and that was, a few weeks ago, everybody was all, the hashtag NPC meme was going around everywhere, and one of the first things I thought of when I saw this and understood it is that back when Rand got criticized in Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, both for her villain characters, I think the word archetypical was thrown away. They're like these. She takes an archetype, and that character works that way. And I thought, brilliant. She came up. Yeah. She came up with the NPC meme.
That's what's called literature.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Right.
That's the difference between fiction and literature. Use an archetype to illustrate a problem in order to provide an analogy that everybody can relate to anthropomorphically. Yeah.
Yes. It's perfect. So, all right. So let's get into the meat of the thing. And one of the things we had this little comment thing back and forth, because you use this word grammar. Everybody kind of knows what grammar is, right? But all right. Yeah. Feel free whenever I say right to say no.
No. I'm helping you along with the conversation, because you're going to say everybody knows this, but
yes, everybody knows. So one thing that I was very interested in is when I saw you, and I see you use neologisms, and I thought this is very interesting epistemology. So could you speak to epistemology? Let's start there.
Great. Pick the hardest damn problem.
Yeah. Let's start with the easy. Yeah. But I like to think
grammars and work backwards. How about that?
Okay. So you can do it. So grammar and epistemology, how they relate from a proprietarian's perspective. What else did I write here? What distinctions would you make between the two? And one last thing is the way that I and I don't know how correct it is, but I like to think of epistemology as simply, what is the quality of your knowledge? Can you take knowledge and kind of reduce it down, ultimately, successfully, to some sort of mental integration or actual sense perceptions? Right?
That's the whole thing, right? There's the positivists, which say, how do I make what I'm certain is true? And there's the falsificationists or scientists who say, well, you can't. You can only know what's false.
Right.
So I'm in the latter camp, right?
Me too.
You can what epistemology is the various techniques we use to eliminate ignorance, error, bias, wishful thinking, suggestion, and deceit from what we freely associate. In other words, how it doesn't matter how we come to a theory. Right, it's just free association. Whatever excuse we get to there doesn't matter, but that theory is good based on how much stuff we can eliminate around it.
Right. In
other words, we've tried. I can't. What I usually tell you is, well, I hold that opinion because I can't falsify it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I can't make it. And so that's the difference. So the positives and the falsificationists, and then you have what my work is, which is the market, which is a competition between the construction or construction, not justification, but construction, and the falsification. If that competition will produce what I think Popper poorly stated as verisimilitude, which is basically a market. He was trying to create a logical analogy for what's a market effect, which is the market competition narrowing us down to the least false.
The least false, right?
Today.
And exactly. I mean, that's exactly how I've always thought of it. Is that you? First of all, I like to say that the only time you're right is when you know you're wrong.
That's right.
Right, and the other thing is that there's a difference between being right and being confident, and that is the process. If you keep trying to disprove your proposition or hypothesis or whatever you wish to call it, if you continue to fail to disprove it, falsify it, then you can have more and more confidence that it might be right or very close to being right.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that's the scientific method, really. I mean, that's what science is. We tend to say there's a scientific method, but it's the set of methods that falsify anything. The eliminate error, right? And that's the set of methods that reduce our ability to err. And so this helps me talk about the grammars a little bit, and I'll give you what that means. So I'm trying to figure out, you always have, when you take a big idea, there's usually, the reason it's a big idea is because the chain of arguments you have to understand, right, is more than one.
It's more than one, right? Okay.
Because if it was just one, somebody would have thought of it, right? I mean, that's the problem, is you get out to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and somewhere out there you've got a chain of arguments. Well,
and it's also, you could also refer to it as integration, right? You're integrating. Integrating. Okay.
So grammar, when you use the old term for grammar was basically the book. A book is a grammar, right? It's the rules of written speech, which is different from spoken speech, right?
Yes.
Turing came along and he said, well, here's the grammar of computers, right? Which is he calls a Turing machine. We don't have to do it, but Chomsky saw that and said, holy shit, that's what our brains do. And that's why Chomsky's famous, as he said, the grammar is our natural grammar, or is our grammatical ability, is our faculty that allows us in real time to construct a stream words of continuous recursive disambiguation. Okay. In other words, we add content until I'm what you say is I understand what you mean, but what we mean is it's no longer ambiguous.
Right. So yes, okay. So you're keeping you're like, all right, don't. I kind of get what you're saying, that you keep having to add until it's like it's honest, it's disambiguous, there's
right. And that's what we mean.
Less and less room that someone is going to get the wrong idea.
Right. And so this is the problem with deception, right? Mm-hmm. Is that you can get someone to where they attribute meaning, but you haven't taken them to truth, which is where the point where it's no longer ambiguous, right? And so deception occurs at the point where you've established meaning, right? And you're suggestible all sorts of ways. The NAP is an example of deception by suggestion. When, in other words, it's meaningful, but it is true.
Did you say NAP?
The NAP, the non-aggression principle,
right?
Is a great example of something that's meaningful but sufficiently incomplete that you can substitute anything you want in there for what you're aggressing against, right?
Yes.
And therefore, to you think you understand, but no, you've just been fooled. Because
it's interesting you bring that up because coming from the background that we've already talked about, and then throw in a little libertarianism there, a little bit of anarcho-capitalism, and so on. I was pretty much on board with the non-aggression principle, NAP, and because it sounds like a good idea. But I think the first one, and I know you have quibbles with David Friedman, but I read The Machinery of Freedom like way back. And he was the one who kind of destroyed the idea of the NAP for me. He says what is initiating force? If your neighbor flips on their porch light and it disturbs you, you're under a degree of force at that point. So you can't you have to get way deeper into what is aggression and what is force.
The NAP is individually choosable, but it's not interpersonally decidable. In other words, you can choose it,
right?
But a judge can't decide by that, right? It's not precise enough. So because the difference is what you consider aggression or non-aggression is not what I would consider it. And this is the problem with it, is that it fools the young guy into saying what other people think doesn't matter. No, it does if you do something that's under their concept of aggression. Well, I get to choose. Actually, you don't. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Right.
Is you don't get to choose what constitutes aggression because because people demonstrate a behavior. Right, they demonstrate what they consider aggression, not what you consider aggression.
Right.
In other words, the problem with aggression is it's determined by what someone else will retaliate against. It's not determined by what you think they're not going to retaliate against, or you could excuse or make an excuse for it. The other person determines it. Well,
just like with the porch light example, one person might say, it's no big deal, and another person's going to go and throw a rock at it. And
my right to have my porch light on is greater than your right to be annoyed by it.
Yeah.
Is what he say? And the answer is no. Because it's whatever a third party figures the third party will decide keeps the peace, because the whole point of having law or social order is keeping the peace.
So that's how So ultimately, you're still going to require mediation of these disputes in some form or another.
You are, but the truth is reciprocity is decidable. In other words, trade is decidable, and a non-trade is not. And I don't want to get into that level of it because we're talking about the grammars, but I want to point out that a half-truth, the NAP, is choosable, but it's not decidable. And there's a difference between, X is greater, 3 is greater than 4 by definition, therefore that's decidable.
Yes.
My porch light being my right X trumping your right for not having it keep you awake at night isn't decidable, right? It's choosable by both parties.
Right.
The answer is that you took an action that imposed on me and it causes me to want to retaliate, and therefore your porch light's an invasion.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you think it is.
Right.
Right. So, we don't get to choose these things.
Yes, music is another great example. Okay, so let's get into this. What?
Grammars. Grammar. I want to finish grammars.
Oh, grammars. Okay, sure.
Okay. So what we just talked about is the grammar of law. In other words, what rules of continuous disambiguation produce decidability in matters of conflict? Law. That's a grammar, just like what rules constitute an expression in mathematics and logic. What rules produce a set of decidability underneath algorithmic software writing? What rules of what rules of decidability produce testimony versus storytelling? What rules of decidability produce storytelling versus fictionalism? What rules of decidability produce fictionalism versus what produce supernaturalism, mythology, right? And so what you say is that what a grammar does is provide the rules of continuous recursive disambiguation given some constraints on semantics.
Okay.
Right? So in mathematics, it's very constrained. The only semantic you got is positional names. It's positions. That's all math is. It's the dumbest. That's why it's so beautiful. It's the dumbest possible set of constant relations in the universe we can come up with is position. Right? Logic is a little more complex because you're saying, well, now I've got to say not only position, but whatever relations. And so we just move through this set of grammars. So a grammar is a set of rules of continuous recursive disambiguation that produce something between the spectrum of meaning and decidability. Okay. And so in other words, a grammar that in the context allowed produces decidability within the terms of the semantics available. Does that make sense to you? Or I feel like I'm watching your eyes and I don't quite have you.
It's a lot to follow. It really is a lot to follow.
So just think of it as math is constrained, right? You can only make certain well-formed statements in math.
Exactly. Yes.
You can only make some well-formed statements in accounting.
Yes. You
can only make well-formed statements in software programming.
Right.
You can only make certain well-formed statements in the law, turns out. Right? The well-formed statements in testimony, your speech, have to be limited to what you could actually observe, what's empirical.
Okay.
Right? And so what are the limits of what constitutes a well-formed statement and that's what a grammar is.
Okay.
The rules of continuous disambiguation that produce a well-formed statement given the constraints you're placing on it.
Right. Okay. Now I got you.
Got it?
Yes.
Which is a really hard concept to get across, actually. Once you get it, it's like, oh, I get it. That's a grammar of this. It's a grammar of that. You're trying to use this grammar in order to make this say that it fulfills these constraints, but it doesn't.
Right. So this just popped into my head, and so where you're familiar with most of the what are called the logical fallacies for yes. So where does that fit into this picture?
Well, I mean, a logical fallacy is generally applied to what's called ordinary speech, right? But it could also be applied to argumentative speech. In other words, ordinary speech is just us talking.
Yes.
Argumentative speech is something else. And so logical fallacies can be applied anywhere, but they're an attempt to create a set of constant relations. In other words, say that this set of properties is constant here when it's not.
Okay.
So if I say, the cat is black, and then I start talking about the blackness of what, I'm saying, yeah, but the cat is black in this context, but black means completely something else over here because you're talking about color theory, and the color theory of black is actually full saturated colors. But if we actually look at this cat, it's probably a degree of blue or brown.
Okay.
Or green, right? Mm-hmm. So constant relations.
Okay, so now I want to talk about. I've had this thing I've said that kind of makes people go, "What?" For a long time. I say, truth versus honesty, and the reason I say that is because to me, there's honesty or dishonesty, right? Honesty is doing your level best to assemble or accumulate everything you can possibly know about something before stating a proposition or
no, let's make it the negative version.
Okay.
Honesty is warranty, giving your promise,
right,
that you have done due diligence on your memory of events.
Perfect.
Right?
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
I have not inflated, conflated, whatever. I've just done due diligence on as I honestly recall events.
Yes.
Now, when you say, have I given truth? Well, you can say, well, I've gone out and collected other information and I've given testimonial truth. I mean, I've gone out and tried to looked at the evidence and said, well, but the evidence says that even though I remembered this, it's this, right? Yes. And then there's analytic truth, which is, well, just logically, we always define, Socrates is a man, men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's an analytic truth, right? And then there's the ideal truth, which means that if we had perfect knowledge, omniscience and omnipotence, right? And perfect speech,
yes,
to speak it with, we could say what is truth, but what is the ideal truth? The problem is we never have omniscience, omnipotence, or perfect language. Right. So the best we can usually do is testimony.
Yes. So okay, now in that realm, we have there's truth. I hear truth used in primarily two ways, like a truth, or three ways. A truth, right? A truth, a static truth. And then you have the truth, which seems to me to be something like an integration of truths. And then the whole truth. And I guess the truth and the whole truth are pretty much the same thing. But do you want to make any distinctions there?
Well, I would say the whole, this is, those words are, those clarifications are actually the problem. You're better to say honesty.
That's why I always like to use honesty instead of truth.
It's honest. I have done the best I can, and I'm warranting to you that from my memory, this is what I recall, right? There's what we call scientific or testimonial truth, which is I've gone out and I've taken measurements and I've done the research and I'm warranting that I have tried to make this false, and that's scientific truth.
Right.
Then there's ideal truth. If I had the perfect information, which is what I think you said complete. I can't though, right? It's unattainable. It's like infinity, right? I mean, we use this word true and this word infinity. So you say, I'm honest, I'm being truthful, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
Right? So honesty, truthfulness, and truth.
In terms of the omniscience, it strikes me of another phrase that I've heard and used that I call fully integrated honesty. So that kind of is like if I was able to fully integrate everything knowable and be honest.
Yeah. I'm going to turn the air conditioning on here for a second. It's getting warm here. I've got a shirt too heavy on. This very interesting place in this building is that it's everybody around this apartment, this condo, keeps their heat really high, so we actually have the air conditioning on. Anyway,
fully integrated honesty, is that close to the ideal?
Well, the problem is it's not operational,
right?
And so you don't know what it means. You haven't. So I would say I have done a warranty of due diligence on my honesty, a due diligence that I'm speaking truthfully. In other words, honestly, truthfully. And there's the truth out there, and I just can't fucking know it.
I can't.
So honesty, truth.
I'm doing my best, though.
What?
I'm doing my best. There's a truth
right. Well, I mean, that's all you can do, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. You can't. It's like the people who say, "I love." My favorite thing is the court. The court question is like, well, you had a preconceived notion, and therefore you in the moment you chose a hostile act. Well, no, in the fucking moment, I just panicked like everybody else did, and I'm an animal, and I did what animals do. Right? I mean, there's no complicated to that. And they try to make the guy guilty or the woman guilty for the fact that you're just, I had a half a second to choose.
Okay, now there's another word, too, that I hear a lot in your circles, and that is the idea of truth-telling. Yes. Where does that fit in, and how is it... And we could also start with... testimonialism in there, so you can get into that. But what is truth? Is truth-telling and testimonialism synonymous?
So you heard me. No, it's the spectrum of truth-telling. Satisfying the demand for infallibility is the reverse way of looking at it. Right. So if I'm honest, I've satisfied some level of infallibility. Right? If I'm truthful, I've satisfied another level of infallibility. If I've reached analytic truth, which is, well, look, I mean, I can't figure out for this to be wrong, right? I mean, it fits all the data, right? I mean, logically, it's consistent. That's analytic truth. That satisfies another degree of infallibility. And if I had perfect knowledge, something is irrefutable, for example, well, I mean, it can't be the other way. So therefore, it's the it's by a tautology is by a great example of a total truth. It can't be another way. So
existence exists, right?
Right. The problem is when you use this word "the truth." Is it brings about it's actually what you really how to avoid a long discussion. One of the things I try to teach is operational language. Test yourself. If you have to use the truth, that's an ideal. That's not a real. I can speak honestly. I can speak truthfully. And I can speak and I cannot speak the truth. I don't know it.
Okay, so it's kind of presumptuous, right?
It's God's call it God's speech if you're being a jerk.
You
say you're not God, you can't speak in God's speech. Right? You can only speak honestly, truthfully, and you can't speak the truth. Only God can. You're not God, so therefore tell me what you're doing. Well, I spoke the truth. No, you didn't. You spoke either honestly, and you're saying I did due diligence against my memory. I spoke truthfully, which means I did the research and said I falsified everything. I've done my due diligence, right? Or you can say I've spoken the truth. Well, if you mean the truth, you can't speak the truth. It's not possible. And it's the same thing with the other problem is the other reason we use operational is a common hack in English language is the verb to be. It's the use of the word is or have.
Right.
So you can't have a property right. You can't have a right. You can be due it in court, but you can't have it. The same thing is so if we get the word is, the cat is black. Well, that's God's speech. You can't do that. You can't possibly know that. What you can say is, I promise I see a cat. I promise the color of the fur I observe is black. Right? And that's what you're saying when you say the cat is black. Well, the problem is people do things, use this word is all the times as a presumption of knowledge. That is true.
Kind of like begging the question.
You're not God. You don't have infinite knowledge, right? So you could say, I promise I am speaking truthfully, honestly. Promise I am speaking truthfully. Or I promise I believe he is speaking honestly. I promise I believe he is speaking truthfully. But that's all you can say. You can't say he's speaking truthfully.
So that it's kind of all like all one big these problems you're pointing out, kind of like all one big question begging fallacy, where
right, exactly. It's really in order to make communication efficient, we rely on the pretense of mutual understanding, but then we claim it to be knowledge instead of understanding, right? Or we claim it to be it's like yes and no, yes and true are really much the same thing. They're a statement of agreement.
Yeah.
And so you just need to, when I say that's true, what I mean is I agree.
Yeah, all these things are popping in my head. Like it's like that sounds a lot like solipsism as well. There's all.
It's all over the place. And once you see it, of course, and you habituate it. You're like, wow, we're all fucking idiots. Excuse me, we're all idiots doing the best.
It's fine. Oh, I'm a big F bomber myself.
Yeah, but it makes. We're just human doing the best we can. But once you realize how much we're counting on shared meaning instead of truth, right? I mean, a truthful statement, or how much on agreement instead of what we could disagree over. You sort of see this as everybody's sort of in clown world doing the best they can.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like I get the sense as I talk to you about this and gain deeper insights and understandings to it. I'm like, Jesus, this is fucking hard.
Yes. And I was like, we all stand on shoulders of giants. I said, it was easy. Somebody would have solved it before I did. But
how can we even have a conversation? Because you're checking yourself, So hey, does that all wrap up into what testimonialism is?
Yeah,
or is there
testimonialism is that, right? We just talked about, except that, in order to go to court, you have to have a set of criteria, standards, right? To test something. And so what I did is I enumerated the tests that you have to pass in order to say I'm speaking truthfully. In other words, what's the universal science? In other words, what's the universal warranties of due diligence you have to issue in order to say I'm speaking truthfully?
Right.
Not honestly.
Honestly is easy because
not that fuzzy range between I'm claiming I'm speaking truthfully, but I haven't done the work, right?
Yeah.
But truthfully, in other words, as if you were in court giving testimony.
Yes. Honesty then in that context is kind of more like, well, this is how I feel,
But feeling is legit. I mean, it's a testimony.
Right.
I mean, it's not observable, but I mean, you can only be honest about your feelings because they're not testable otherwise. Right? So it's the only thing you can be.
All right. So hey, I don't like to make these things super super long, and we can always do it again anytime we want. I wanted to ask you about the elections last night, unless you have anything more to add, and then we can move on to that.
No, I mean, no, I mean, I don't need. I mean, go to. I think we covered a couple of really hard topics together, and I think that if your audience gets something from that, that's pretty awesome.
Well, I noticed at first how my understanding built. I'm not saying like, oh, I've got this down, but I know a lot more than I did 45 minutes, 30 minutes ago, 40 minutes ago. So that's good in itself. And hard stuff is hard stuff for a reason. It's hard,
It's like you get, what happens is I just want to make a point that's kind of, I wish I could heal this sort of, war I've got with Hans, or conflict I've got with Hans Hop. But, I mean, in 3 generations, we solved social science when nobody else did. And that's the value of the anarcho-capitalist research program, is that we got here. I mean, Mises and Rothbard use their Jewish pill pull and critique. Hoppe uses his German rationalism, and I use my Anglo-empiricism. But the truth is, over 3 generations, we got here.
Yes.
And so it's pretty cool from that perspective. But you're standing on giants. I mean, I know my whole difference in concept between the generations that came before you and mine is that I spent my whole life growing up in a world of programming because I thought that was the future. And so I have operational models in my head. I don't have the logic and mathematics that are ideal. I have operational constructs in my head. And so I come after Turing. So it's easy for me to look back at Hayek and say, I see where you went wrong. And it's easy for me to look at Hoppe and say, well, you're saying it in German rationalism, which is kind of nonsense, but I can take what you said and I can say it scientifically, and then it's not goofy anymore. It's the real thing. Okay. And so, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Anyway, about the election.
Yeah.
I mean, it's everything's going out. I mean, I hate to feel like, it's like, I just feel like you're what is that movie? Everything's deterministic and all the balls are moving and they're going exactly what you'd expect. I mean, we're going to have a civil war, just like I said, I don't know if I'm going to be right when, but it's coming and we're going to have one because this problem didn't get solved in the first Civil War. We inherited a windfall from the collapse of the British Empire. We've ridden that wave. But, I mean, we're still having the same damn problem, which is it's a continent, and we're trying to run it like a country, and people don't like empires.
Yeah. It's like, well, I mean, if you look at it statistically, there's the argument out there that, well, it's not that bad because he only gained a seat or two in the Senate. And only lost less than you're supposed to, I guess.
In the House.
The House, right? But it's just so it's frustrating that you have a lot of positive signs, underneath the whole MAGA umbrella, and you sense this sort of.
There's no positive sign. What there is everybody's given up being an optimistic conservative and becoming a pessimistic conservative. They've given up that that the left is going to learn. The left is given up believes that they can seize the opportunity. So it's not going to go anywhere. All you're doing is what everybody always says is if you have homogeneous equality, fairly equal polity, you're going to get a certain kind of voting. You're going to get gender-based voting. If you have a diverse, homogeneous but rapidly changing polity, you're going to get
race,
class-based. If you have a heterogeneous polity, you're going to get race-based. If you have once you surpass that problem, which is nobody thinks through this, you're going to get religion-based. And so it doesn't make any difference because we all pursue, will to power. It's our genes, right? And everybody does that. So if you build an empire, you're going to get race. You're going to move from dispute over policy, in other words, in a heterogeneous policy, a homogeneous polity, to dispute over classes, to dispute over races, to dispute over religions. I mean, you don't get to choose. You're going to have that chain of arguments.
We have elements. We have elements of all of those, don't we?
Sorry?
We have some elements of
We have all
of
them
those.
because we're an empire.
Yeah.
And so my argument is you can either be a small homogeneous state and worry about gender relations, in other words, the family, and pick policy, or you can be a large empire and have constant civil wars. And the only difference is these people who have empires get poorer and poorer and poorer as capital is consumed by the masses, and these little homogeneous nation states,
like the Scandinavian states, the small populations, they're all the same, right?
Yep. The only way to do it. And Japanese and Chinese know.
Yes. So there you go. Okay, so let me. I'm gonna stop the recording.